Have you ever had a dream so vivid, so disturbingly real, that it left a mark on you long after you woke up? My name is Calder Winfield, and as an archivist specializing in ancient and forgotten manuscripts, my life is devoted to exploring the mysteries of the past. But nothing in those dusty pages could have prepared me for the nightmare that began one ordinary night. It wasn't just a dream, it was something far worse. Something that reached out from the depths of my mind and left a shadow on my soul. The first sign that something was wrong came before I even fell asleep. My apartment was unusually quiet that evening, the kind of silence that isn't peaceful but oppressive, like the world was holding its breath. The lights flickered twice, their warm glow momentarily replaced by an icy dimness. I dismissed it, blaming faulty wiring, but the unease lingered. As I lay in bed, a peculiar sound reached my ears, a faint, rhythmic tapping. It seemed to come from the walls, slow and deliberate, as though someone, or something, was trying to get my attention. I told myself it was just the old building settling, a common occurrence in a city filled with decaying architecture. But as the tapping continued, I realized it was forming a pattern, almost like Morse code. It stopped abruptly, leaving a suffocating stillness in its wake. I turned off the bedside lamp and closed my eyes, determined to ignore the strangeness. That's when the dream began. In the dream, I found myself standing in an open field, the kind of barren expanse that stretches endlessly in every direction. A dense fog rolled in, so thick it seemed to smother the world around me. The air was cold, sharp, and carried a metallic tang that stung my nostrils. There was no moon, no stars, only the pale, oppressive glow of the fog. Shadows twisted and writhed within it, their movements unnatural, almost predatory. I tried to move, but the ground beneath me felt unstable, as though I were standing on shifting sands or the surface of a frozen lake about to crack. Then came the whispers. At first, they were faint, indistinct murmurs carried by the wind. But as they grew louder, the voices became clearer. They spoke in fragmented sentences, their words chilling and nonsensical. The past is awake. The fog remembers. You must not run. The voices overlapped, creating a cacophony that filled my ears and made my skin crawl. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if I were being watched by countless unseen eyes. And then I saw it. Far in the distance, a figure emerged from the fog. Its shape was indistinct, more shadow than flesh, but it radiated an aura of malice that froze the blood in my veins. The figure stood perfectly still, yet I could feel its presence closing in on me, as though the fog itself was a part of it, a weapon it wielded to ensnare its prey. My breath quickened, and my heart pounded so violently I thought it might burst. Desperation gripped me as I turned to flee, but the fog had closed in on all sides, an impenetrable wall that offered no escape. The whispers grew louder, their words more urgent, but I couldn't make sense of them. All I could do was run blindly, my feet slipping on the uneven ground, my lungs burning with every breath. The figure remained behind me, its presence like a cold hand pressing against the back of my neck. Before I could scream, the dream ended. Or so I thought. I woke up gasping for air, drenched in sweat. My room was dark, but the faint glow of the streetlights outside cast long shadows across the walls. That's when I noticed something that turned my blood to ice. On the floor beside my bed was a single footprint, damp and muddy, leading from the doorway to where I lay. Subscribe to the channel now, because this story is far from over. If you're brave enough, hit that like button and share your theories in the comments. I have a feeling this isn't just a dream. It's an opening to something much darker. Something that doesn't stop when you wake up. The dream began with an overwhelming sense of wrongness, the kind that makes your skin crawl and your instincts scream to wake up. But I couldn't. I found myself standing in the middle of an endless, desolate field, shrouded in a fog so dense it felt alive. The air was icy, every breath sending sharp stabs into my lungs. The silence was absolute, as though the world had been muted. I tried to call out, to hear the sound of my own voice, but no words came. Only the rhythmic pounding of my heartbeat filled the void. The ground beneath me was strange, soft, spongy, and unnervingly warm, as if something alive slumbered just below the surface. With each step, my shoes sank slightly, and a faint squelching sound echoed through the fog. The metallic tang of blood hung heavy in the air, stinging my nostrils. I scanned the surroundings, but there was nothing except the fog, swirling in unnatural patterns, as if it were deciding whether to engulf me or let me pass. Then, out of nowhere, the whispers began. Faint and fragmented, they seemed to come from all directions at once. The voices spoke in a language I didn't recognize, yet their tone carried an unmistakable urgency. I strained to make sense of them, but the harder I tried, the more my head throbbed. My instincts told me to turn back, but there was no back, just the fog, stretching endlessly behind me. A sharp noise cut through the whispers, making me flinch. It was a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the ground. It came from somewhere ahead, though I could see nothing. My body moved forward despite my mind screaming for me to stop. Each step brought me closer to the noise, the sound growing louder, harsher, more desperate. Then I saw it. A figure stood in the distance, just barely visible through the fog. It wasn't moving, but the dragging sound continued, as though the air itself carried its echoes. The figure's outline was wrong, distorted, hunched, with limbs that seemed too long, too thin. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its gaze, cold and penetrating, as if it were peeling away the layers of my mind. The closer I got, the more the whispers returned, now louder and overlapping, creating an eerie chorus that made my skin crawl. Leave but stay. The fog chooses. The words were disjointed, but the menace in them was clear. My legs trembled as I tried to take another step, but then the figure moved. It didn't walk, it glided, the fog parting around it like water. The dragging sound grew deafening, and suddenly, I realized it wasn't coming from the figure. It was coming from beneath me. I looked down to see the ground cracking, dark tendrils slithering out from the depths, reaching for my legs. My feet felt rooted in place, the warmth of the ground turning into a searing heat that shot up my spine. I wanted to scream, to wake up, but the fog seemed to seep into my lungs, choking me. The figure stopped, its distorted body now only a few feet away. Slowly it raised a hand, or what should have been a hand. Instead, it was an elongated claw, dripping with a black, viscous substance that hissed when it hit the ground. As the figure reached toward me, the whispers reached a fever pitch, their words becoming clear for the first time. The past knows you. The fog will take you. Just as the claw grazed my skin, a sharp sound shattered the dream, a single resonating crack, like a whip snapping through the air. I bolted awake, my body drenched in sweat and my hands trembling. For a brief moment, I felt relief, but then my eyes caught something that made my blood run cold. On the ceiling above me, written in dark, dripping letters, were the words, "You're not awake yet." If this story has sent chills down your spine, subscribe to the channel now and leave your theories in the comments. I don't know what's real anymore, but the fog? It's still out there waiting. And the dreams, they're only getting worse. As I wandered deeper into the dream's fog-shrouded expanse, a gnawing unease began to consume me. The air grew heavier, pressing down on my chest like an invisible weight. My footsteps, muted and uneven, sounded as if they were swallowed by the ground itself. Every step seemed to echo far too loudly, as though announcing my presence to something lurking just beyond the veil of mist. Shadows began to shift at the edges of my vision, subtle movements that disappeared the moment I turned to face them. The world felt wrong, as if I were walking through a space not meant for the living. I stumbled upon a decaying wooden fence, its slats weathered and splintered as if abandoned for decades. Beyond it, faint shapes materialized, buildings or what was left of them. They leaned at unnatural angles, their windows shattered and their frames warped, as if the fog had warped reality itself. Despite their dereliction, the structures seemed to breathe, their exteriors faintly pulsing in time with an ominous hum that seemed to come from the very air. I didn't want to move forward, but the whispers in the fog grew insistent, almost beckoning. Closer. Come closer. The truth waits. Inside one of the skeletal structures, I spotted a faint glow. It pulsed faintly, like a dying ember struggling to stay alight. Drawn by a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity, I stepped inside. The air was damp and reeked of mildew and something metallic, like rust or blood. The floor creaked beneath my weight, each step a painful groan that reverberated through the empty space. The glow came from a table in the center of the room. As I approached, the details came into focus. A lantern, old and corroded, its light flickering erratically as though struggling against an unseen force. On the table, next to the lantern, lay an open book. Its pages were brittle and yellowed, but the words scrawled across them were fresh, written in a dark, wet ink that seemed to glisten under the lantern's feeble light. The words shifted as I tried to read them, rearranging themselves into new sentences, all variations of the same chilling phrase. "You've been here before." My breath hitched as the ink began to drip from the page, pooling onto the floor and forming a shape, something grotesque and alive. Suddenly, the lantern extinguished, plunging the room into darkness. The hum from the air outside grew louder, more menacing, vibrating through my bones. In the pitch black, I heard a noise, soft at first, but growing louder with every passing second. It was a scraping sound, like nails dragging against wood. The noise came from the walls, the ceiling, the floor. It surrounded me. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as my fingers scrambled for the lantern, but the cold, damp air made it impossible to relight. A whisper broke the cacophony, distinct and chillingly close. "You shouldn't have come." I froze, the weight of those words sinking deep into my chest. Then I saw it, a pair of eyes glowing faintly in the dark, their gaze piercing and predatory. They didn't blink. They didn't move. But they saw everything. My body was rooted in place, a cold paralysis overtaking me. The figure behind those eyes began to emerge, its form twisting unnaturally as it dragged itself closer. Just as the figure reached for me, the lantern burst to life with an unnatural brilliance. The light revealed the room as it truly was, not empty, but filled with rows of figures, shadowy and formless, their faces featureless save for faint impressions of mouths frozen in silent screams. They reached toward me, their movements jerky and desperate, as if trying to pull me into their world. The figure with the glowing eyes snarled and lunged, its body distorting into an inhuman shape. I bolted from the room, my legs weak but driven by pure instinct. Outside, the fog was alive, swirling violently as if enraged. The shadows within it moved with purpose now, their forms closing in around me. I ran blindly, my breath ragged and my vision swimming. The whispers chased me, louder and more coherent. "You can't escape. You never could." When I finally stopped, gasping for air, I realized I was standing in the exact spot where the dream had started. The fog was still, the shadows silent. But in my hand, I was clutching something I hadn't noticed before, the lantern from the room. Its faint glow illuminated a single word carved into its base: return. If you felt your heart race as much as mine did in that moment, subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts below. Was this just a dream, or was it something else? Something far more sinister? Let me know your theories, because I have a feeling the fog hasn't finished with me yet. The fog closed in tighter, suffocating and relentless. I could feel it pressing against my skin like invisible hands, cold and damp, as though it was alive and aware of my every move. My pulse was deafening, a drumbeat of panic that reverberated through my body. In the eerie glow of the lantern, I saw a path appear ahead, carved not into the earth but into the fog itself, as if it were inviting me deeper. Against my better judgment, I followed. I had no other choice. The fog left no room for retreat. Each step forward felt heavier, the ground beneath me growing softer, almost sticky, as if I were walking on the surface of something organic. The whispers in the fog returned, no longer faint but sharp and demanding. "You're almost there. Find it. Take it." Their tone was a mix of desperation and command, as though the fog itself wanted me to uncover whatever secret it guarded. The path led to a clearing, and at its center stood a structure, a decrepit tower of blackened stone, impossibly tall, piercing the fog above. Its surface was slick, as if coated in oil, and symbols were etched into the stone, glowing faintly in the dim light. They pulsed rhythmically, almost in sync with my pounding heart. At the base of the tower was a door, its frame twisted and warped, as though it had been forcibly reshaped by an immense power. The whispers grew into a cacophony, each voice overlapping the next, driving me toward the door. My hands trembled as I reached for the rusted handle. It was icy cold, a chill that sank deep into my bones. With a creak that echoed endlessly, the door swung open, revealing a dimly lit room. Inside, the air was thick and suffocating, carrying the acrid stench of decay. The lantern flickered wildly, its light struggling against the darkness that seemed to emanate from the very walls. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, and atop it rested a small object, an ornate box, ancient and intricately carved. Its surface was covered in symbols identical to those on the tower's exterior. They glowed faintly, pulsing with an unnatural energy. As I approached, the whispers ceased entirely, replaced by a low, resonating hum that seemed to vibrate through the very air. My hands hovered above the box, drawn to it by an irresistible force. When I finally touched it, a searing pain shot through my fingers, but I couldn't pull away. The lid creaked open on its own, and from within, a dark mist began to spill out, swirling violently before coalescing into a shape, a figure. The figure towered above me, its form humanoid but grotesquely wrong. Its limbs were elongated and jagged, and its face was obscured by a shifting void where its features should have been. Yet, I felt its gaze bore into me, cold and all-seeing. Its presence was overwhelming, an embodiment of fear itself. Then it spoke. Its voice wasn't a sound but a presence in my mind. Its words burned directly into my thoughts. You were chosen. The fog remembers. The fog knows. I tried to back away, but my legs refused to move, rooted to the ground by an unseen force. The figure extended a hand, or something resembling a hand, toward me. In its grasp, it held the pocket watch I had found earlier in the dream, its hands spinning wildly in reverse. "Take it," the figure commanded. The air grew colder, and the lantern's light dimmed until it was nothing but a faint flicker. The whispers returned, more frantic than ever, urging me to obey. My trembling hand reached out, fingers closing around the watch. The moment I touched it, a wave of darkness engulfed me, and the ground beneath me gave way. I was falling, spiraling through a void that was neither light nor dark, but something in between. Visions flashed before me, shadows of people screaming, their faces twisted in terror, all consumed by the same fog that now enveloped me. Their voices merged with the whispers, and one sentence echoed louder than the rest. "You can't escape what has always been a part of you." I landed with a jolt, gasping for air, my body drenched in sweat. I was back in my bedroom, but the pocket watch was still in my hand, its face cracked, its hands frozen at midnight. I wanted to believe I was awake, but the lingering smell of decay and the faint hum in the air told me otherwise. The fog had followed me back. Subscribe to the channel now if you want to uncover what happened next, because this nightmare is far from over. Share your theories in the comments. What do you think the fog wants? And why does it feel like it's only the beginning? Something is coming, and it's closer than you think. The morning after the dream, I awoke to an unsettling silence that felt almost unnatural. The world outside my window seemed muted, as though the fog from my dream had seeped into reality. The air in my apartment was thick, carrying a faint metallic tang that I couldn't ignore. My body felt heavy, weighed down by an inexplicable fatigue, but the object in my hand quickly jolted me to full awareness, the pocket watch. Its cracked face gleamed faintly in the pale light, and its hands, frozen at midnight, seemed to mock me. I examined it closely, feeling a shiver run down my spine. The intricate carvings on its casing bore symbols I couldn't recognize, and touching them sent a jolt of cold through my fingers. A faint whisper echoed in my mind as I turned it over, a voice that didn't belong to me but felt disturbingly familiar. "The past is waiting." I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was just a lingering effect of the nightmare, but deep down I knew better. Determined to find answers, I turned to my work, old archives and forgotten manuscripts, the tools of my trade as an archivist. My search began with the symbols on the watch, which I sketched onto a sheet of paper. Hours passed as I combed through historical texts and obscure references, but every lead ended in frustration. Just as I was about to give up, a faint memory surfaced. I had seen those symbols before, etched into the margin of an ancient map I had cataloged years ago. I rushed to the archive where the map was stored, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. The old storage room was dimly lit and smelled of aged paper and mildew. As I flipped through the fragile pages, I found it, the map of a forgotten village, abandoned centuries ago. And there, scrawled in faded ink along the edges, were the same symbols. Beneath them was a single word, Haveth. The name sent a chill down my spine. I had never heard of Haveth before, but something about it felt disturbingly familiar, as if it had been buried deep in my subconscious. I began searching for records of the village, poring over old newspapers and obscure journals. The deeper I dug, the more horrifying the details became. Haveth had been a small, isolated settlement, nestled in a valley perpetually shrouded in mist. The villagers spoke of a mysterious fog that would roll in at night, consuming everything in its path. People who wandered into the fog were never seen again, and those who lived to tell the tale spoke of whispers and figures in the mist. The village had been abandoned after a series of inexplicable disappearances, leaving behind only rumors and superstitions. But the most chilling detail came from a decades-old police report. A young archivist, much like myself, had vanished while researching the village. His name? Elias Winfield, my great-uncle, a man my family had rarely spoken of. The report mentioned one final clue he left behind, an ornate pocket watch, discovered on his desk, its face frozen at midnight. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the watch in my hand. This couldn't be a coincidence. Somehow the dream, the watch, and Haveth were all connected, not just to me but to my family. The realization filled me with dread, as if an unseen force had been pulling me toward this moment my entire life. I reached out to the local historical society for more information about Haveth, but my inquiries were met with hesitance and vague answers. One elderly historian, a man named Edgar, agreed to meet me in person. His voice trembled as he spoke, his words steeped in fear. "You shouldn't be digging into Haveth," he said, his eyes darting nervously. "Some places are meant to be forgotten. The fog isn't just a natural phenomenon, it's alive. It chooses people, pulls them in. If you've dreamed of it, then it's already started. It won't stop until it has what it wants." His words sent a shiver down my spine, but they also ignited a burning need for answers. Why had the fog chosen me? What was its connection to my family? And what did the pocket watch mean? I left the meeting with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. I had to go to Haveth. As night fell, I found myself staring at the watch on my desk. The symbols on its surface seemed to glow faintly in the darkness, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. The whispers returned, soft but insistent. "Come back. Find the truth. The past is waiting." I tried to dismiss them, but they grew louder, filling the room with an eerie hum that made my ears ring. Then, as if guided by an unseen hand, the watch's hands began to move. Slowly, they ticked backward, each movement filling me with a sense of impending dread. When they stopped, the air in the room turned icy, and I felt the unmistakable presence of something watching me. What's waiting for me in Haveth? Why does the fog seem to know me? And what secrets will I uncover about my family's past? Leave your theories in the comments, but I'll warn you, some mysteries might be better left unsolved. The road to Haveth was little more than a winding trail, overgrown and forgotten by time. The trees on either side loomed tall, their gnarled branches twisting together to form a canopy that blocked out the sun. As I drove, the light grew dimmer, as though the day itself were retreating. A sense of unease crept over me, thick and unrelenting, as if the air itself carried the weight of an impending doom. Even the engine of my car seemed reluctant, sputtering with a low, uneven rumble that mirrored the pounding of my heart. The first sign of the fog came as I turned a sharp corner. It crept onto the path like a living thing, its tendrils curling and twisting unnaturally. I stopped the car, unsure whether to proceed. The fog seemed to pulse, almost as if it were breathing, daring me to step forward. The whispers began again, faint and fragmented, weaving through the dense air. Closer. Almost there. The truth waits. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but the pocket watch in my hand ticked loudly, its frozen hands moving for the first time since I found it. Midnight. I gripped it tightly, feeling its icy surface burn against my skin, and stepped out of the car. As soon as my foot hit the ground, the fog thickened, enveloping me completely. The village appeared suddenly, as if the fog had been concealing it until I crossed some unseen threshold. The ruins of Haveth were as haunting as the stories described, abandoned homes with shattered windows, their roofs sagging under the weight of decay. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of wood and the distant rustle of unseen movements. As I walked through the village, the sensation of being watched became unbearable. Shadows flitted across my peripheral vision, vanishing the moment I turned to look. The whispers grew louder, overlapping and incoherent, like a crowd of voices fighting to be heard. My breath came in short, ragged gasps as the fog seemed to close in around me, narrowing my path. It was then that I saw him, a man standing in the doorway of one of the crumbling houses. His silhouette was indistinct, blurred by the shifting fog, but his presence was undeniable. I approached cautiously, the weight of the watch in my pocket grounding me. "Are you here for the answers too?" he asked, his voice trembling and raw, as though he hadn't spoken in years. The man introduced himself as Edgar, a name I recognized instantly. He was the historian I had spoken to days earlier, though he looked far older now, his face gaunt and his eyes sunken. He held a lantern that cast a weak, flickering light, barely penetrating the dense fog. "I warned you not to come," he said, his voice carrying a mix of anger and despair. "But I suppose it's too late now. The fog doesn't let go of those it chooses." I demanded answers, my desperation overriding my fear. Edgar hesitated, his gaze darting nervously to the fog around us. "The village, the fog, it's alive," he whispered. "It feeds on the forgotten, the lost. It pulls you in with promises of truth, but what it shows you, it's not what you expect." He led me to the center of the village, to an old chapel barely standing. Its wooden doors were warped and cracked, and its steeple leaned precariously to one side. Inside, the air was colder, the whispers louder. At the center of the room stood an altar, and atop it rested an object that made my blood run cold. An identical pocket watch, its hands frozen at midnight, just like mine. "This is how it starts," Edgar said, his voice a trembling whisper. "Each watch belongs to someone the fog has chosen. They're keys, but also traps. Once you touch it, the fog knows you. It remembers." The whispers turned into a low hum that reverberated through the chapel. The air grew heavier, and I felt a presence, something watching, waiting. Edgar grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "You have to leave," he said, his eyes wide with terror. "But even if you do, it won't be over. The fog is patient. It always gets what it wants." Before I could respond, the lantern flickered violently and went out. Darkness consumed the chapel, and the whispers became deafening. The fog poured into the room like a living flood, swirling and twisting around us. I could barely see Edgar as he screamed, his voice swallowed by the growing roar. Something moved within the fog, a shape, impossibly tall and shadowy, with glowing eyes that pierced the darkness. It reached for Edgar, and as its clawed hand touched him, he vanished, his scream cut off abruptly. The figure turned toward me, and the air grew impossibly cold. I stumbled back, clutching the pocket watch as if it could somehow protect me. The whispers softened, their words clear for the first time. "You can't run. The past always catches up." I bolted from the chapel, the fog twisting and writhing around me. My legs felt like lead, my lungs burning as I ran blindly through the village. The shadows followed, their movements unnatural and relentless. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the village, where the fog abruptly thinned, letting me escape, for now. If you're watching this, I need your help. The fog isn't just in Haveth, it's following me, haunting my every step. The path back to the center of Haveth was shrouded in an unnatural stillness. The fog no longer moved like a living thing. It loomed, heavy and oppressive, smothering all sound. My breath came in shallow gasps, each step forward feeling like a battle against an invisible force. The whispers were gone now, replaced by an unbearable silence that made my every movement feel intrusive, like I was disturbing something ancient and unspeakable. The chapel stood ahead, its skeletal frame barely holding together, as if defying the natural decay of time. The air grew colder as I approached, the pocket watch in my hand ticking softly, its rhythm erratic and uneven. Each tick felt like a countdown, though to what, I couldn't say. Inside, the chapel was even darker than before. The faint glow of the pocket watch illuminated the altar, where the second watch still rested, its surface gleaming faintly. The symbols etched into it seemed alive, writhing like shadows underwater. I felt an inexplicable pull toward it, as if some unseen force demanded I pick it up. The moment my fingers brushed its surface, the air erupted with a deafening roar. The whispers returned, louder and more chaotic, their voices blending into a chilling symphony of anguish. The ground beneath me trembled, and the walls of the chapel groaned, as though the building itself was alive and reacting to my presence. Then the fog surged inward, spiraling into a vortex at the center of the room. From its depths emerged a figure, impossibly tall and cloaked in shadows. Its form was both human and inhuman, its limbs elongated and jagged, its face obscured by a swirling void. Two glowing eyes pierced through the darkness, locking onto mine. The presence was overwhelming, a suffocating weight that made it impossible to think or move. It raised an arm, and from its hand dangled yet another pocket watch. This one was different. Its surface was smooth and polished, reflecting my face in distorted fragments. The whispers grew quieter, replaced by a single voice that spoke directly into my mind. "You have come far, but you are not free. The fog binds you to what you've forgotten." Images flashed before my eyes, memories I didn't recognize but felt deeply connected to. A child running through a misty field. A woman's voice calling my name. A small, unmarked grave shrouded in fog. The weight of the past bore down on me, but the memories remained just out of reach, like fragments of a puzzle I couldn't piece together. The figure stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate, each step causing the ground to quake. "The truth is not a gift," it said. "It is a burden, and you will carry it." It extended its hand, offering me the third pocket watch. The moment I touched it, my surroundings changed. I was no longer in the chapel. I stood in a vast, endless expanse of fog, the ground beneath me shifting and unstable. Figures began to emerge from the mist, faceless shadows with hollow eyes, their forms distorted and incomplete. They surrounded me, their mouths moving silently, as if screaming words I couldn't hear. The glowing eyes of the figure pierced through the crowd, and its voice boomed, louder than ever, "You cannot escape. You are one of us now. The fog surged forward, wrapping around me, pulling me into its depths. The cold was unbearable, and the whispers became screams, filling my head with incomprehensible noise. Then silence. I woke up on the floor of my apartment, the pocket watch clutched tightly in my hand. My body was freezing, my breath visible in the air. The symbols on the watch glowed faintly, their light pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. On the floor around me were muddy footprints, too large to be my own, that led to the corner of the room, where the fog seemed to linger, swirling faintly before dissipating. When I woke up, the world felt wrong. The sunlight streaming through my window was pale and cold, its warmth absent, as if filtered through some unseen veil. The pocket watch lay on my bedside table, its surface polished and gleaming unnaturally. I picked it up, half expecting the symbols to start writhing again, but they remained still, silent yet watching. Its hands were frozen at midnight, as though mocking me with the moment everything began. I tried to go about my day, but the world outside felt hollow. Conversations with strangers felt muted, their words fading as soon as they left their mouths. People avoided my gaze, their expressions blank, as if they were unaware of something lurking just out of sight. The fog was gone, yet its presence clung to me, a heavy weight I couldn't shake. The whispers started again, faint but persistent, drifting through the quiet moments of the day. They came from nowhere and everywhere at once, speaking words I couldn't fully comprehend. It's not over. The fog knows. It follows. I couldn't escape them, not even in the solace of sleep. That night, I awoke to a strange sound, a faint tapping, rhythmic and deliberate. It echoed from the corner of my room, where shadows seemed unnaturally dense, writhing like smoke caught in slow motion. The air grew colder, my breath visible in the dim light. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, until I finally rose to investigate. In the corner, I found a message scratched into the wooden floor, the letters jagged and uneven as if carved in desperation. "IT never leaves." The words sent a shiver down my spine, and I staggered back, clutching the pocket watch in my hand like a talisman. Its surface was ice cold, and for the first time, I noticed something new, a small crack running through its face. The whispers surged, louder now, their words clear yet incomprehensible, like a language I was meant to understand but couldn't. I felt the room shift, the walls closing in, the air thickening. And then, as quickly as it began, the noise stopped. The fog returned the following night, spilling through the cracks of my window like a living thing. It moved with purpose, curling around my bed, suffocating and cold. I tried to move, but my body felt paralyzed, held down by an unseen force. From within the fog, I saw the same figure, the towering silhouette with glowing eyes. It stood at the edge of my bed, motionless, its presence filling the room with a suffocating dread. "You've been marked," it said, its voice low and resonating like the tolling of a distant bell. "The truth follows you now. You cannot escape what you've become." The figure extended a clawed hand, and in it was another pocket watch, identical to the one I already held. This one was pristine, its surface unmarked, its hands ticking backward with a rhythmic certainty. When I refused to take it, the figure stepped closer, and I felt its breath, icy, unnatural, on my skin. "You must choose," it said, "to accept or to fade." The words lingered in the air long after the figure vanished, leaving behind only the faint scent of decay and the lingering whispers of the fog. The new watch sat on the edge of my bedside table, waiting, its ticking the only sound in the oppressive silence of the room. I don't know what the fog wants or why it chose me, but I can feel it creeping closer, pulling me deeper into its grasp. The symbols on the original watch have begun to change, rearranging themselves into something I can't decipher, and the whispers are louder every night. I've tried to ignore the new watch, but I know I won't be able to forever. It calls to me, promising answers I'm not sure I'm ready to hear. The question is, what happens if I choose wrong? If you followed me this far, you need to understand something. The fog isn't just in Haveth. It's everywhere. It's watching, waiting, choosing its next victim. I don't think it's done with me, but I fear it's already looking for someone else. Subscribe to the channel, share your theories in the comments, and let me know, what would you do? Would you take the new watch or leave it? Because sometimes, the greatest mysteries aren't the ones we solve, but the ones we survive. And as for me, I'm not sure how much longer I have before the fog takes me completely.